welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. Hello, welcome. In the name of the Lord, I said hello, welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. We really missed you. What's been happening? Good to see you. We really care. We have a Father gonna bless us all. Now we're here to praise His name. Now we're here to praise His name. Hello, welcome. In the name of the Lord, I said hello, welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. Hello, welcome. In the name of the Lord, I said hello, welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. We really missed you. What's been happening? It's good to see you. We really care. We have a Father who's gonna bless us all. Now we're here to praise His name. Now we're here to praise His name. Hello, welcome. In the name of the Lord, I said hello, welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. Hello, welcome. In the name of the Lord, I said hello, welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. Hey, we really missed you. What's been happening? It's good to see you. We really care. We have a Father who's gonna bless us all. Now we're here to praise His name. Now we're here to praise His name. Hello, welcome. In the name of the Lord, I said hello, welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. Hello, welcome. In the name of the Lord, I said hello, welcome. We're here to praise the Lord. Yeah, we're here to praise the Lord. I said we're here to praise the Lord.
Well, good morning, boys and girls. It's lovely to be with you again for another edition of Virtual Kids Quest. Still really miss you, and we hope that again we'll be able to meet up sooner rather than later and be able to do this all in person. But let's get on with this morning's lesson because there's a lot to cover. This morning I'm going to start what would be a little mini-series continuing on our lessons, and we want to start to look at the area of the Ten Commandments. To start, I don't have enough time to read the passages, but I'm going to give you the passages again like I did in our last talk. Pause and let you read those, and then we'll return to the rest of the talk once you've read that. So write this down. The passages I want you to look at are Exodus chapter 19 verses 16 to 20. That's Exodus chapter 19 verses 16 to 20. And then Exodus chapter 20 verses 1 to 6. Okay, so let's pause now. Hopefully you've read those, and it's given you a little snippet into the start of the Ten Commandments and how the Ten Commandments actually came about. So, to start, I want you to think about this. Can you think of any rules that you have in your house? One rule that we have in our household is that we made when Caleb was big enough to start playing with his toys was, if you play with your toys during the day, every toy has to be put back into the toy box before Caleb goes to bed at night. This is my 3-year-old son. I now have a 3-month-old son as well, who isn't old enough to play with him yet. But that rule will stay in our house when he gets older and enough to play with toys himself. It just means that the house is a wee bit tidier at night time, and Mummy and Daddy aren't tripping over toys when we're coming into the living room with our cup of tea to watch a wee program on the TV at night. Let's look at the Israelites. At this stage, this is now 2 months after they left Egypt, and God had now decided that his people needed clear guidance, and therefore he would give them these commandments to Moses, that Moses would then communicate to the people of Israel of what these commandments specifically would be. God demanded that there would be a boundary marked. They were in the wilderness of Sinai, and this was at the foot of Mount Sinai, this large mountain. And God demanded that there would be a boundary marked out, so that the people of Israel wouldn't go near this boundary, only until such times as the ram's horn was blown. Then they were allowed to go in and out of this boundary. And God commanded Moses to come up to the top of Mount Sinai, to bring Aaron with him, and there the Ten Commandments were going to be given to him, and Moses was going to engrave these in these stone tablets so that they would be there for the people of Israel to live by for generations. This morning I want to cover three things. I want to cover, firstly, why are the Ten Commandments important, especially today? And the other two things I want to cover are what the first and second commandments actually are. Okay, so firstly, why are the Ten Commandments important? Well, the Ten Commandments for the people of Israel, these people who, as I've spoke about before, have been brought out of slavery in Egypt, and they're in the wilderness, and they've now come to the wilderness of Sinai. But a lot of the time, they still sinned and still let God down, as we do today. So the first point was that there were going to be guidelines from God to show the Israelites how to live. There were going to be guidelines that would help their own well-being, and they weren't just going to be a strict set of rules that took away all their fun. There were to be guidelines from God to show the Israelites how to live. Secondly, they set a standard of things to do and what not to do. These Ten Commandments were going to govern their lives and show them what was right and what was wrong. Thirdly, they confirmed the uniqueness of God. They showed the people of Israel a little bit about what God himself was like. He's a holy God who's sinless and perfect, but also a God who shows anger and gets angry when he doesn't receive the attention and the love from his people that he deserves. The law was also given as a foundation of the nation of Israel. Now I want you to imagine what it would be like if we live in Northern Ireland today. I want you to imagine what it would be like if we lived in Northern Ireland and there were no rules. Imagine if you were able to drive your, maybe some people do, imagine if you were able to drive your car over 100 miles an hour in a 30 mile an hour limit. Could you imagine the amount of more accidents there would have? Could you imagine if you were able to murder somebody and people knew you did it and were able to prove you did it, but yet you didn't have, there were no consequences for that? You were taking away somebody else's life and you had no consequence for yourself. You didn't have to go to jail because there were no laws in your land. The laws are so important for us today, and that's why we have police who enforce those laws. And the law was given at this time as a foundation for the nation of Israel, and it was as important to them as it is for us today. The law, finally, would remind the people of Israel of their sinfulness. Just as our laws today remind us if we break the speed limit and we get penalty points that we've done something wrong, these laws would remind the people of Israel of their sinfulness and how they needed to ask God for forgiveness for those sins. So that's a wee bit of an introduction in means of why the Ten Commandments are important. Now I want to move on and I want to talk about the first commandment and what exactly it is and what way we should treat it. So the first commandment is, "You shall have no other gods before me." You can reread that again in the second part of the biblical passages that I gave you at the start, Exodus 20 verses 1 to 6. So the first commandment is, "You shall have no other gods before me." So for a little bit of fun, before we get into the real meat of this commandment, I looked up online a few definitions of what children similar ages to you guys thought the first commandment meant. A little boy called Lee, who's 8 years old, wrote, "The first commandment means you should worship God instead of Nintendo, computer, or TV, and you should read the Bible more." A slightly older girl of 12 called Amber said, God is kind of jealous, and also the one and only God. You probably have your own idea of what this means, but I'm going to try and help you understand that. An idol is something, anything, or anyone that would be in the place of God in our lives. And an idol is something which takes the attention away that God deserves and puts it on something else. It's a distraction. Gods today, there's different religions. We've got Hindu, there's so many other religions apart from Christianity, but God in his Bible clearly states that he is the one true God, and he is the only God that should be worshipped by his people. And idols, ancient or modern, they always result in the end in frustration and in the end despair. And because of our sinfulness, a lot of the time, we like to go and seek idols. We like to seek things which we think bring us pleasure and happiness and kindness. But in the end, if we continue to pursue them over God, it will lead in the end to despair. For example, think about this. Imagine wanting all year the newest console. There's the PlayStation 5 coming out. Okay. And you're really obsessed with this, and it's all in this lockdown. It's all you can think about. You want the PlayStation 5 and the new FIFA game, or for some girls, maybe it's there's a new pair of shoes out, and you've seen these shoes way back at the start of the year. You've asked for Christmas that you would get these shoes. And you're going to wear these shoes, and this is just going to be the best thing ever. But whether it's the console or the shoes, and eventually you get sick of them, and then we move on to something else. We get an idea in our head of something else that we really, really, really want. And yes, when we get this will bring us happiness. The reason that we eventually get sick of these things is because they take the place of God. And people and things can never fill the God-shaped hole in our lives. We're each created. It's not a physical hole that you can look through and see the front to the back. It's a hole that God has placed in our heart that only he can fill. And only when he fills that will we be satisfied and will we be truly happy. When we don't have any other distractions and God's given us true place. And if God isn't our first love, the one we love the most, then life will become an endless journey with a dead end. That's just true, and that's what happens. So I want you to ask yourself this question. Is there anything or anyone in your life who you love more than God? And that is this. If that is the case, you need to get rid of that, because that in itself is putting something in the place that God should have in your life, and God wouldn't be pleased with that. And that's the simplest and easiest way to describe what the first commandment means. You shall have no other gods before me. I want to move on and cover the second commandment just before we bring this to a close. This morning you're listening really well. The second commandment is you shall not make idols. Now, you might have heard this said before, but it's very, very true. God makes no mistakes. And this is why I believe the second commandment follows straight after the first, and that they're actually linked, because it helps us to remember the first commandment as we try and learn the second. So the second commandment really means do not put anything before God by making idols for yourself. And you know, the Egyptians, if we think back to the Egyptians, they treated Pharaoh as an idol. He had all the power, he had all the wealth that anybody could ever want, and he almost was treated like a god. Pharaoh himself believed that he was the most powerful man to ever live, and people were forced to bow down to him. They were made slaves and forced to work in terrible conditions to build statues that looked like Pharaoh so that they could be bowed down to, all to feed this man's ego. So he really in himself was the definition of an idol. And the people of Israel would have saw this firsthand before the Exodus, when God led them safely out of Egypt through the Red Sea. And that is the simplest way to describe the second commandment. Having other gods is idolatry. Idol worship, not just in Egypt, but in the surrounding nations of Israel, was a huge issue. They would have carved images out of wood and stone, and they would have made these false gods that they bowed down to. And they didn't just bow down to the statue and worship them to take away from gods, or the worship they should have given to God, but they also did many, many worse things, which involved murder and terrible things. And what they believed was the sacrifice to this God that would have forgiven them for their sins, when they should have been worshipping the only one true God. And because God hates idolatry in any form, he gave this commandment to his people. This command meant that God's people, and us today, if we're Christians, we're to keep ourselves separate from this idol worship. God is a holy God, and idols steal the attention and the honour that belong to him. Today, we might not physically carve an idol out of something we have in the house and physically stand and bow down to it, but we can be obsessed or depend upon things deep inside our hearts that other people might not know about, but that we do. And this in itself is how we can easily create our own idols. Even at your age, before you go to secondary school, it still can be done very, very easily. And the scary thing is that even good things can become idols if we're not careful. Just some of the good things that I thought about. Hobbies. There's nothing wrong with hobbies, and it's good to be able to exercise, or some other hobbies. You might be into learning or reading books, but these things can so easily become idols if we spend so much more attention on those than the attention that we should be giving to God. Even charity work, such a brilliant thing. For all the football fans out there, you've heard about Marcus Rashford at the minute trying to get these meals secured for the school kids, and he seems to be in every newspaper going. But that for me at the minute seems to be what you would call nearly an obsession and an idol, and it's a brilliant thing, and he's doing an absolutely incredible job. There's nobody even close to him what he's doing. But if we get to that stage and there is no presence of God in our life, then that too could be an idol. So it's something to look out for. And God warns us that idols can lead to either one of two things. If we allow idols to creep into our life and we make idols for ourselves, the passing down of sin will go from generation to generation. If you think about, if I think about Caleb now, my son, going back to him, if I do something in the house, like for example, if I work from home on my computer, he has a little toy laptop and he brings it up and he tries to copy me, and he says, "Daddy, I'm working like you." Children tend to copy the example that the parents set for them. And God's saying here that if parents are sinful and make idols for themselves, this will be passed down to their children, and to their children's children, and their children's children's children, on down the generations. And it will maybe be harder for those children to come back into relationship with God because of these idols. So that's something to really look out for, because it wouldn't be pleasing to God. And we know that God hates sin. The second thing to think about is, if we're willing to push idols aside, and if we're willing to give God the rightful place that he so desires in our hearts, then God actually says in this passage that he would bring about a blessing, and he promises that he would bless and take care of his people for future generations. So we've one or two options there of what we want to do. The important thing to remember is that the Ten Commandments are still relevant today. Sometimes you think, oh, they're in the Old Testament and we don't have to worry about those anymore because we now have the New Testament, but they're still relevant today. And I want you to start off this week, but I want to lay down this challenge. Start off this week. Let's try to follow those first 2 commandments. Remember them. And different circumstances that come up in your week. Try and remember them. Remember, firstly, the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. And the second commandment is you shall not make idols. Next week, God willing, I'll be back and we're going to cover the 3rd, the 4th and the 5th commandment. And we'll see just a little bit more about how God was going to guide and direct his people and what they should and shouldn't do and how they should live to please him. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart, down in my heart. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart.
What else you got?
I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart, down in my heart. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart. I've got the wonderful love of my blessed Redeemer way down in the depths of my heart. Where? Down